One of the members of my community, Elaine, had this question which you may resonate with. I have a deep and persistent shame about the length of time it's taken to ground since my initial breakdown and breakthrough. I think the sense of time that awakening and Kundalini takes in us is very unique, and it's hard for us to compare our journey and how long each phase takes for us with another person. First of all, you're not just purifying and consolidating who you are in this lifetime. What is purifying and aligning and becoming a vessel of awakening has had countless reincarnations. And we literally cannot compare our multiple lifetime history with another person. Someone next to us in a retreat may have been in a monastic setting for lifetimes, perfectioning their meditation technique and working with Kundalini, and come into this life with their system already purified, with a lot of light and space present in their system. So the Kundalini kind of looks easy. It's just because they've done the work already. Some of us find that our Kundalini and awakening intersects with sometimes brutal trauma, physical trauma, violence, domestic violence, sexual abuses, children. And so we have this intersection of two huge processes. One is a deep and profound purification, and the other is this unraveling and unfolding and digging into and excavating personal history. And those two things are a very difficult interaction at times, and it takes time. So if you find that you're having a trauma-infused or trauma-activated Kundalini process and it's taking you time, I just want to say that's okay. That's completely normal. And it can take, depending on the depth of and the extent of your trauma, quite a number of years to unpack it, unfold it, because you need to do it in a way that's sustainable. You need to unpack trauma when you're going through any process, let alone awakening process, in a way that still allows you to show up in your life. So I'm a very big proponent of making sure when someone's going through that particular intersection that it's at a pace and is stable enough that as much as possible someone can still go to work, can still care for their children, can still care for themselves. And that means we go slower, but we're safer, and the process and the change is more effective, and then you get a much better result most of the time at the end. And you can use whatever modalities are resonant for you for working with that particular intersection. The thing about Kundalini also that can make it hard to compare, why is theirs going much faster, why does theirs look much simpler, is literally the nature of how the Kundalini is functioning in your body. Is Kundalini stable? Is she able to penetrate the locks and blockages in your body? Is your body able to feel safe and allow her to do that work? Or is there a lot of stress and terror and struggle that makes that purification more conflicted and conflictual? This is going to create a sort of resistance and difficulty and stress, and sometimes a lot of anxiety. So the nature of your awakening and how it woke up and what activated it, whether the Kundalini settled, what's happening historically, what the state of your chakras are in, all these things influence, and it's part of why we can't compare one person's awakening to another. And I'm a really good example of that. Even after my awakening, I was not ready to do any significant teaching for 10 years. I just waited and waited and waited and waited, and I watched other people go out into the world and offer teaching and tools and share their gifts in a lot of very elaborate and amazing ways, including colleagues of mine, and I just stayed quiet and I stayed in my world, and I showed up in the ways that I was asked to show up, and I expanded my gifts in the ways that were appropriate. And I didn't do the thing that was actually my calling because it wasn't my time. And I didn't really know at the time why I had to wait. Why was the maturing of this awakening and its sharing in the world taking so long, and I'm absolutely glad that it took a decade. I wouldn't have been mature enough, wouldn't have been deep enough, my heart wasn't awake enough. I needed to go through some terrible losses in my family system and the loss of my brother. All of these things matured who I was and the offering that I have, and was able to take eventually into the world, and I wouldn't change a thing. So if you feel like your awakening is slow or non-conventional, it's also important to recognize that while we can create sort of general phases of awakening and general steps that people progress in through Kundalini, you can kind of actively see those phases. And there is an average time that people might spend in each of these phases. And I see it regularly working with people. Often will come in a very dysregulated, very maybe anxious or messy purification process, and then it stabilizes, and then the system is able to then suddenly rapidly ingest a lot more consciousness as it moves towards completion. And that there are averages for these phases, and you can kind of, after you've been doing this work for a long time, really see where someone is and what the steps and the tasks are that are happening in each phase. But that's just an average. We all are interacting in each phase of Kundalini and awakening. Kundalini with our personal history, our health, our trauma history, our mental well-being, our ancestral legacy, our genetics, our past lives, our karma, our tendencies and our habits and our discipline and the circumstances of our lives. How much opportunity and financial resources do we have to take care of ourselves during awakening, or are you just surviving? Like, that makes a big difference as well. There were periods in my awakening where I was just financially surviving, and I had to make very erudite decisions about where I was going to put my financial resources to support my awakening. And other people have vast amounts of financial resources that they can bring to bear. So the pace of our awakening is this wild intersection of all of those variables, and then all the variables of Kundalini and awakening. So you're going to be unique. I see people that spend many, many, many years in the hermit phase because there's some particular way that's cooking their awakening where that's absolutely essential. And some people who just dip into that hermit phase and then they zoom out of it again because that's all that they need in this lifetime. If you do feel like your Kundalini is unstable after a long period of time, or you're struggling to ground, or you're struggling to find your way through a particular intersection between Kundalini and personal history or trauma or illness or sensitivity or other challenges, and it's not shifting no matter what you've done, I think that at that point in time, it can be really important. If you feel like, this just feels intuitively, I feel like I've been here for too long. Intuitively, I feel like something's missing, then trust that and see if you can find the missing piece that can help you shift phases, or can help your body stabilize or commune more sweetly and in a more friendly way with the awakening process, or your psyche can befriend the process more to reduce conflict. Go and seek answers. Find someone somewhere that you get an internal yes to. It doesn't mean it's an expert on awakening. It might be an expert on your shoulder injury, and it's the musculoskeletal misarrangement of your shoulder injury where you had maybe a reconstruction from a car accident. That on its own can completely make it hard for the Kundalini energy to pass through the chest and the throat and into the head. And you can get these huge volumes of energy that build up here, and then you get all of these difficult symptoms in the chest and the heart and anxiety. And that may not need some expert in awakening to say, hey, wow, I think it's your shoulder. It might be your chiropractor who just puts your shoulder back into place, or some beautiful deep tissue body work that helps your body to relax out of that tension and shock state that it's held in. And then the Kundalini corrects itself. And this is why it's really important to get quiet and centered and listen to and watch out for the signals of what might be best for you in the next steps of your awakening, because it's not always what you think it is. Sometimes the thing that's making your Kundalini hard is not a spiritual thing, it's like an anatomical issue, right? Or a psychological sort of jam, right? Where some part of your psyche is stuck and can't quite move. Also, if you're feeling like that sort of phase or issue that you're struggling with in your awakening it's gone on for too long, then I would get really quiet and I'd pray. I would make an altar and I would pray every single day to be shown the way. I would pray for a breakthrough. I'd pray for it to show up. I'd pray for someone to tell you about it. I'd pray that you just randomly find it on the internet. Life in the universe will find a way if you get quiet and sincere and you surrender and you pray and you ask. It cannot, if you are congruent and aligned in the way, it can't not show up for you. And then the next challenge is to actually notice when it shows up for you. And I've seen this happen over and over and over again, including in my own life. Also, if you feel that this phase is extrapolated and it feels unhealthy and it feels like you're not progressing and nothing's really changing, or it's a little bit like Groundhog Day, and sometimes phases of purification are Groundhog Day. You're purifying and you get up and say you're purifying and you're purifying, and it just goes on and on and on and on because that's actually right. And sometimes you can intuitively feel, actually, this Groundhog Day has been going on for way too long. One of the other things I want to say to you is sometimes the only thing you're missing is one idea or one piece of information or one soft touch or a frequency from someone. It's not always a big thing that makes the shift. Sometimes it's a small thing. I really want you to encourage you just to keep your heart, ears and eyes open for that small thing that can just be the missing piece that allows something to shift and consolidate and to move forward. So I hope, Elaine, that this gives you some tips and thoughts and doorways and advice, and for anyone else who can relate to Elaine's question, because I think we can often feel ashamed and comparative and judgmental about who we are in our awakening process compared to others. And while things can, sometimes be standardized, honestly, you just have to stay close to what your process needs in this moment and what are its next steps to support you to heal and to progress.